As you guys know, we have the AAME job board, jobs.aame.org. It is absolutely free to post any of your senior executive level recruitments. It's free for recruiters, it's free for cities themselves. However, if you would like to have those jobs included in my newsletter, which goes out to 10,000 subscribers every week on LinkedIn, especially if you're trying to reach those passive candidates, right? Those prized passive candidates that aren't actively looking but are reading my newsletter for news and information about what's going on in the profession, you can put those listings in the newsletter for $199. There is a link on the AAME job board, the pricing page. Just click that, and you will see the $199 posting in order to get those listings in the weekly newsletter. All right, all right, all right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America. And with me today is Sam Toles. He is a veteran of the show. He was on my episodes 67 and 68. Your city is doing social media wrong way back in August of 2024, so almost a year ago. And Sam, we had a really great series of interviews. I got really great feedback on it. It was one of the most, commented on, at least in my personal sort of message inbox and text messages. I had really great feedback on that episode, and I'm excited to have you back on the program. Welcome to the show, Sam. Why don't you quickly introduce yourself and let people know what a social media master you are? Toot your own horn, buddy.
Oh, thank you, Joe. It's good to see you again. Although we've gotten to be close. I just saw you in Fort Lauderdale a few weeks ago, and we
That's
text
right.
from time to time on all things government and social media. But it's really good to be back on the show. I cannot thank your audience enough. They really were a big spark to Civi Social. When we talked, the business was only a couple months old, right? So this has been. I feel like I've been on this journey with you, and so. I'm Sam. I'm the founder of Civi Social. And before I talk about Civi Social, I'll just talk about me and my background. I was a former elected official. I was a council member in a city called Cathedral City, California, about 50,000 population from 2010 to 2014. I then got the job of a lifetime. I was recruited to join Vimeo to be their general manager to run a social media platform. And before that, I'd worked at the big studios, MGM, Warner Brothers, Paramount, doing marketing and business development, a whole bunch of things. But I'd never really touched social media. I'd made television, I'd made films, I'd marketed films, but never really saw social media. And Vimeo changed my life. I realized very quickly, and it happened in a conference. I went to the VidCon conference and watched a bunch of 12 and 13 and 14-year-old kids chasing other kids of the same age around like they were the Beatles. And I was like, oh my God, everything I know about media is wrong. Like they don't care about television. They don't care about movies. This is their media. And in 10 years, by the year 2024, they're going to be the primary consumers of media, and this is not going to change. So I became obsessed with social media, left Vimeo to run digital media for MGM Studios, then went on and ran Bleacher Report, which is the world's largest sports social media publisher. Have worked with influencers with tens of millions and even hundreds of millions of followers like Mr. Beast, big athletes like Michael Phelps and Saquon Barkley. Really made an incredible living becoming the master of social media. And then I kind of burnt out and said, you know what? I'm tired of making a lot of money for cantankerous billionaires, and I've made enough money for myself. I need to do something that's worthwhile and valuable. So I retired, took some time, and then this light bulb went off in my head. My mastery of social media and my love and passion for local government, and could I combine those? And I'm going to shout out a city manager, Andy Hall, who was my city manager in Cathedral City. I called Andy. I trusted Andy. We've remained friends many, many years. And I said, Andy, I have this idea and it may be crazy. And if you didn't hear it from me, right, tell me I'm wrong because I don't want to go down a path. But I think I can solve your social media problem in under 2 weeks. It's a one-time thing through a program I'm thinking about. And if that was something that someone came to you and said, this is a program, would you say as a city manager, this would be valuable? And he said, every city in the country needs this. It's a desperate need and we want to be first. So went to San Clemente, which is his city, ran the test pilot, didn't charge him. I was like, let's see if this works. It worked phenomenally well. And over this last almost a year, I have been to 13 states, now going on 16 organizations, and the momentum is just incredible. And that's me, that's Civi Social, and that's what we do.
Awesome. Hey, Sam, I'm kind of curious because you mentioned the fact that we kind of been on this journey together, and I kind of felt the same way, but I don't want to sound
Yeah.
arrogant when and say that. So I'm happy to hear you say it. But I'm kind of curious, just for my own personal edification, do you recall when or where you first became aware of what I was doing and how it fit in conjunction with what you're doing? Because I remember to this day having our first conversation, and we'll get that maybe in a second here. But I'm just kind of wondering when did I first kind of come onto your radar?
Yeah. So, I'd been in the private sector. I'd been working in the social media world. My literally one and only contact, well, I had two. I had Andy and my dear friend Charlie, who is still the city manager in Cathedral City. Andy left to go to Imperial Beach during the middle of my term. We hired Charlie. But those were literally my two contacts in local government. And so I began researching. And my research tool of choice is artificial intelligence. And I said, if I needed to connect with people who have exceptional influence and an important voice with city managers, county managers, village managers, who would you suggest? And you were the top choice of AI.
That's fascinating.
So
Wow.
then
Okay.
I found you. I listened to a bunch of your podcasts. I fell in love immediately because you are so entertaining. I'd listened to some other podcasts before I'd asked the AI who I should think about. So it was interesting that a podcast was its sort of like first recommendation. It wasn't like a professional association or anything. It was just like, this podcast is where you need to go. And so I started listening to your podcast, and I was like, wow, this is a totally different flavor from, sort of what the standard fare in this space is, where people talk a lot, but it's kind of not entertaining. It's not real. This guy gets how to tell a story, gets how to get people engaged. And so I just shot you an email out of the blue and said, I don't know if you'd ever want to talk to me, but I've got this thing and I think it's interesting. And you're like, you seem odd, but I think we should have a conversation. And then we chatted, and then, the rest is kismet. So that is the behind the scenes.
That is so funny. I didn't know that story, so that's hearing that for the first time. And it's kind of funny, Sam, 'cause I remember getting contacted by you, and I haven't shared this, and I'll keep it very minimal. But my wife has some experience working in the entertainment industry, and when you sent me the inquiry, and I saw your background, there were some mutual connections or whatnot. I'll just put it that way, right? And so I was like, "Hey, hun, like, is this guy legit, or is this guy just giving me like a BS, like, spam reach out via LinkedIn? And is this guy the real deal?" Anyway, so we had a conversation. I remember this day where I was sitting in the couch, and we had this really good, probably hour-long conversation, maybe even more, where you started sharing me your story, and you told me your story, right? And I
Yeah.
said, "Oh man, this guy's awesome. This sounds like the real deal. He's legit." And that's how you and I came together on the podcast, and we had a really great episode shortly thereafter. And it's been really fun to watch your journey because it's just been amazing. And obviously, you mentioned a second ago you've done like over a dozen different organizations in that period of time, and I know there's a lot of mutual connections between my platform and those city managers. And so, congratulations on everything you're doing with Civil Social, Sam.
Thank you, Joe, and congratulations again on AAME. Like I think that the intersection of what we do is so unique, and looking forward to maybe teasing something towards the end of this episode of
Yeah,
how we
absolutely.
bring that together, right? So stay tuned. Maybe I don't know if we're going to do a two-parter. We talk a lot, so this may be
Yeah.
into two parts, but at some point we'll talk about it.
Well, definitely there we have been kicking around some ideas, and I maybe we'll unpack that up. Well, we will definitely unpack it a little bit later, okay? So but the big reason why you're on the show today is, one, we had really good conversations and really good feedback in the past. I've received really good feedback from the city managers and county managers who have hired you and City Social to come out and teach their staff, and those are connections. And so everything I've been getting is just nothing but great feedback on what you're doing. And you recently released a book, and it's called The Social Media Playbook for City and County Managers. I assume it's available on Amazon, right?
It is. It is.
Okay.
But
Uh,
if folks send me an email, which you can link in the show notes, I
I
guess.
will.
I'm happy to get them a copy for free. If you're a city manager, county manager, if you're a CAO, you don't need to spend the money on Amazon if you don't want to, because I didn't write the book to make money. It's just on Amazon so that people who have tricky ethics things and don't want to get like, and I also promise you, I will send you the book. I will never pester people. I'm not that sales guy, right?
You're
That is
not.
not the reason I do what I do. And we'll talk about that on the show, but like, this is a mission for me. This is something I do out of deep passion for local government and to help people in your roles. And so that's why I wrote the book. So if you don't want to spend the $25, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll make sure to get one out to you.
That's awesome. Make sure you guys tell me you heard it on the City
Please,
Manager
yeah,
Unfiltered
yeah.
podcast. But yeah, but when you are organically good at what you do, you don't need to pester anybody for sales. And Sam, I know you're really good at what you do. So, before we go into sort of an extensive conversation on all things social media, I was reading your book and we've been having these conversations, and something just sort of hit me, right? And that is, social media is really new, relatively speaking, in the grand scheme of things, right? Of life and professional and personal lives and what have you. But, when we talk about social media, there's almost like this default, uncommunicated understanding that we all know what social media is when we say the phrase social media. But that's not really true. That's not really real life. And, it kind of hit me when I was reading your book, Sam, like, why is it that local governments engage in social media? Like, what is the purpose for local governments to be on social media? And I think we don't really ever ask ourselves that question. We just sort of skip over that, and that's sort of a fundamental part of the equation, is it not?
Yes, I think it's a form of self torture, is the answer to that question. I really do. The only reason that you engage is because you truly are masochists. No, look, it goes back to what I just said a minute ago, right? Like being somebody who had been trained in and has a passion for movies and television, to be in a room when you're midway in your career and realize that media is not what you thought it was is really jarring. But it's not social media. It's just the media has changed. It is a part of the media ecosystem. It's the primary part of the media ecosystem. I was watching a documentary on Walt Disney, fascinating entrepreneur. And I did not know this, but Disneyland, the original California theme park, was financed because Walt Disney was the only person, the only movie studio that was willing to look at television as a revenue stream. And so he financed the building of that park by partnering with ABC to make content about Disney, right? Every other studio basically like, well, television's not our business, right? So it's a threat. It's going to destroy us. So we can't possibly help television. But the reality is, once you put that box in the home and people don't need to trudge out to the technology has changed. You cannot go back and say, we're going to force them back into a behavior or force them back into a medium that's our medium. Television was just the evolution of media in the 50s. And Disney was smart enough to see that, to the point that he use that medium to finance a beautiful theme park, which we all can enjoy today. And I look at social media the same way. Like local news, the local newspaper, the flyers. That is still media, but it's like the movies or like Broadway. It's aging and it's speaking to less and less and less people. And social media is like TV was back in the 50s, right? And you can ignore it. I used an example in one of the presentations I did. I was like, we listened to Roosevelt and the fireside chats, right? The fireside chat was something that was transformative. But when Roosevelt did the fireside chats, radio had been around for at least 15 years, like at mass scale, right? So it wasn't new, but politics is like, oh my God, the fireside chat, it's a new way we communicate.
Right.
And then, of course, the famous Kennedy Nixon debate, right? And Nixon famously wouldn't wear makeup because he's like, I can't wear makeup and they'll think I'm a girl and I'm going to talk better and it doesn't matter, right? But we know that it did matter. People who listened to Nixon on the radio thought that he
One debate.
what, right? He won the debate. But people who watched overwhelmingly thought Kennedy won the debate. And of course, Kennedy won that election. And so I'm asking all of you in the profession, don't be a sweaty Nixon, right? Please don't do that, because that's the essence of what this is. I'd love to go a little deeper specifically as it relates to the profession, because I think it's super important for
Yeah.
your audience to understand this, right?
Hey,
And
hey,
it,
Sam, real quick, I
yeah,
want to make sure. I mean, when you use the phrase "sweaty Nixon," which I've never heard in any context before, so I'm kind of laughing over here. But I want to reiterate this one more time. You're saying, "Hey, do not be this curmudgeon who's resistant to the changing, evolving landscape that we're all operating under." And frankly, Sam, to get kind of personal, I was sort of one of those sweaty Nixons up until a couple of years ago. I did not like social media. I still have an aversion to social media personally. I think it brings out a lot of bad, negative things in society. But I do think that social media is hugely important in your professional development and your professional sort of career arc if you use it properly. And I'll say this time and time again, the reality is, and we're probably going to come back to this theme over and over again, Sam, but the reality is we all have a personal brand or identity. The only question is whether or not we are the ones that are proactively shaping it or passively allowing others to shape that and mold that brand that we have.
it's a perfect tee up to what I was just going to talk about. Because look, from the CAO perspective, from the people who listen to this show, your core audience, I cannot tell you over the last year how many managers I've met personally who have either been fired because of social media, who are afraid that they will be fired because of social media, or who are just like terrified of social media because it could bring them into the line of fire. And what you hear constantly is managers are genuinely being tortured by this medium. And I went into this to really help my friends in city management, because as I mentioned, whether it was Andy or Charlie, like I cared about these people. I saw their value immediately. When I got elected, I had no idea what a city manager was. It's like newly elected, meet your city manager. I'm like, what's that? But through working with them, I developed an immense respect, in the same way that I had for my corporate CEOs. I'm like, oh, it's a CEO. Okay, I get this. We're the board, they're the CEO, and they have this professionalism and this ability to navigate the day-to-day operations of a very complicated organization, and also navigate a board. And the difference, and I tell my CEO friends this all the time. I'm like, and I have friends who are running, billion-dollar corporations, and I always say, your job ain't nothing compared to a CAO. And they're like, come on. And I said, look, you get 4 board meetings a year. 4. One of those board meetings is public. The other 3 are just you and your board. At the public meeting, the crazy people that come to the microphone, the sort of rando shareholders, are the least important people in that room. In a public CAO role, those people are the most important. They meet 24 times and every meeting is public, right? That is the first dynamic. And the second dynamic is the people that are sitting on those boards, in the vast majority of instances, have no experience in public administration, right? They don't know what it's like to run a municipality. So you're constantly educating them. Whereas a corporate board, these people, they're trained. They came from the industry that they're sitting on the board. That's why they're there. So it's a very different profession. And social media is one tool that is, I think, very, very vital to protecting the power dynamic for the city manager, right? Because the power balance is, as we just discussed, it's like really in favor of those outside forces. So how can you rebalance? How can you reshift? And I was thinking about this because, like, there's this unspoken thing in your profession, Joe, about quiet professionalism, right? Like the electeds are the ones that are front and center. They're the ones
Right.
who should be talking. But unfortunately, that silence that comes from that, I think, genuine intent to like stay in the background seeds the narrative to the STPs, the same 10 or 20 people who torture on social media. And so what I like to advise, CAOs, managers, is you're the narrator. You're not the star of the show, but you're the narrator, right? You got to guide how the public sees the work that's happening. It's not about you getting credit or you being this sort of like face of the city. In fact, in most instances of the work that I do, it's the line staff that are getting in front of the camera and showing that work. There are other, like Mike Paulus, I love what he does. He's very front and center, but that's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm saying. But you are giving the public a view. I like to say think about being on social media as holding a flashlight in a dark room, and you're guiding them to see the pitfalls, the challenges, the opportunities. It's not about you jumping up and grabbing a cell phone and going like, "Hey besties, I'm your city manager and I'm here to tell you about how great I am." It's really about embracing a form of media that helps contextualize. And by doing this, by telling the story of the work that you do, you are grabbing that power back, because if your communications is strong, if the organization is connected with its community and people say, we love what our city manager is doing, we love what our staff is doing, we believe in the power of what this organization does, we see it, it's visible, it's a new park, it's more cops on the street, whatever it is, that new fire truck, we see it constantly, it's in our feeds, we're supportive. Well, guess what? That's how you rebalance the power dynamic, because now it's a whole different thing for an elected official to say, I'm going to get rid of the city manager, and or because I don't like, because everyone's supportive of the work of staff because they see the work of staff, and the city manager is the one controlling that overarching narrative and strategy. And again, media is about strategy. So you have your strategy around your PR, you have your strategy around how you deal with local news. You've got trained professionals that usually come from local news that are doing that, but you just are on social media because you think that you have to, and then you just suffer. And that's, I guess, I hope that helps answer part of
Yeah.
it. I can give you the tacticals as to like what the advantage for the taxpayer is, but I wanted to give that initially and get your reaction to sort of like how I think about this when it comes to managers specifically.
I'm with you 100%. Now, I guess I would step back here and say that I think you can have multiple purposes, or one organization's purpose for being on social media can be substantively different than another organization's. But you hit the nail on the head there, Sam, and that's the storytelling aspect. Kind of use your Walt Disney theme park analogy. You're taking your residents, your citizens, on a guided tour. If you're doing, I don't want to say if you're doing it properly, because again, I don't want to say there's one model fits all, right? But if you're going beyond the, hey, I want to be on social media just to share information or push out information and be sort of just, nothing but the facts, ma'am, and that's it. Okay. But if you're trying to really use social media and get the full benefit of it, I think you're taking your residents and your taxpayers on a journey. Like, think of a theme park ride. Go to Splash Mountain in Disneyland or something. You go through the different world and you see the different characters and what have you. That's kind of what you're doing on social media. You're taking them on that scripted tour. And I hate to use the word scripted even because it sounds so Machiavellian in the sense of playing games with creating the narrative and spin and whatnot. But that's the reality. Hey, look, here's the deal, right? Let's we're all adults here. Let's not kid ourselves. Let's not be naive. Okay, you as a city manager, you're leading the organization, you're leading the entire city. It's not all about you, it's not all about the elected officials. Oftentimes it's about the staff, as you allude to, but the buck stops with you, and you are going to be the ultimate beneficiary if you do social media correctly. And that is getting the residents understand, first of all, educating the residents about what you're doing, but also getting them invested in you and your leadership. And that's what you're basically tacitly doing. And I talked about this before in some of my conversations with Chris Mann, the former Yucaipa, California city manager, in the sense that when you are trying to, as a city manager, there's many city managers out there who've been burned. They've been fired, they've been terminated in sometimes very unfair, blindsided fashion, and they can get gun shy and feel like, hey, I just want to be in the shadows, I want to be behind the scenes, I do not want to stick my head up and be the focus of any attention. But the reality is, your job security is dependent on many things, but one of those things is being able to tell your story and connect with the people you serve, right? Because no one cares about somebody if they can't personalize or have a humanized sort of story to it, right? That's why you see, I won't get into the politics of the issue, but you will see in journalism the attempt to humanize different stores or put personal stories in there because they're trying to have the reader get invested in what they're writing about and have a connection to the human element of it. And so if you are a city manager and you go about your business and you're focused on just letting all the elected officials take the credit and the staff to get all the credit for everything that's doing, and no one knows who you are and what you're about, why in God's name would you expect anybody to really come to bat for you if you somehow get on the wrong side of a city council or a member of your city council. They don't even know you exist. That's a really a long-winded answer of saying social media is really your way of engaging in storytelling as a city manager, whether or not you're actively writing telling the story or sort of setting the script in motion with your staff, depending on how big your organization is. And I don't know if we're going to get into this either, but since I'm on the subject, I mean, Sam, there's this aversion for many city managers to engage in social media, right? For obvious reasons to a degree. But it's storytelling, much the way that your resume and cover letter and everything that you're doing when you're applying for a job is storytelling. When you go compete for a position, you better believe that you're storytelling. Your resume is an aspect of storytelling about what you've done in your career and what you're going to do for that next organization. So,
Yeah, and look, as younger elected officials begin to come online,
great
well,
point.
they're going to start looking at your city's social media, right? They're going to look at what you're doing, the story that you're telling. And if it's a bunch of bland Canva posts and a bunch of STPs attacking you, that's not going to be a good look, right? So, like, this is an investment in you first and foremost, right? And I can say that on this podcast because I care about city managers, and they should have a degree of like, hey, I have a very tough job. I have the right to make this job a little easier. I'm going to zig a little bit into the Disney analogy again because I think it's super interesting in this context, and then I'll talk about like it's not just for the city manager. So I want to dive another level deeper, right? What's in it for the organization? What's in it for the taxpayer, which is still really, really important. And so, but before I do that, like as I'm watching this Disney documentary, Disney, when he was building Disneyland, was going against the tide. Theme parks were originally fairs and they had fallen out of favor. They'd gotten very bawdy, lots of sort of like peep shows. As America suburbanized, the idea of sort of like the end of the trolley tracks leading to the sort of communal fair point, which was a family endeavor initially, had become really kind of not great. And you still see this today in the sort of traveling fairs. Like people spent about 2 hours at any given amusement park, and the goal of that industry was to extract as much money out of your pocket through, shell games, literally, and getting you on the rides, and like just how can we take people for what we can because they're not going to want to stay here for very long. What Disney thought about when he built Disneyland, which is like a city. I mean, when you think about the analogy, using the idea of that theme park and applying it to the profession that you guys are all in, it's actually quite apt. It was like, how do I invite people to find the beauty and the imagination, the excitement within this city, the city that is Disneyland, and spend time and feel comfortable, and the thoughtfulness of how he created Main Street and the castles at the center, and each world branches off of like it's all thoughtful. And all city managers, this is a language that I think everybody does understand. When you're planning roads, when you're planning new developments, when you're planning your new downtown or revitalizing your existing downtown, you think about these things strategically. Like, what is the like, how are we going to make this great for our community? When you're building a park, right? Like, these are things that take a lot of thought, a lot of strategy, and you do engage in narrative storytelling, whether you're aware of it or not. Like, what is it that people are going to experience? How are they going to engage in the community in which they live? Social media is no different. It's just you have to get comfortable with applying those nascent skills that you have in your existing profession, applying them to storytelling and actually bringing that to life for the community in the place where they're consuming this content. And back in the day when it was television and radio, there were gatekeepers and there were problems there too, because they were always playing gotcha, right? That was the nature. So everything was started as this defensive crouch, but no one's thinking about this in a proactive way. I just wrote a couple things down. Like, one thing I've noticed when I go from city to city is I meet with a lot of members of line staff, younger workers in sort of early to mid stage of their career. You know what I hear constantly? I am desperate to tell our story. What we do is so good, but there's so many blockers and so many restrictions and so many checkpoints, and there's no strategy around it. It's just like, we can't tell our story, the good stuff that we do. Your staff is getting beat up just like you are, and it impacts their desire and their joy in the work that they do, which of course impacts your taxpayers and your residents, right? Like, it has a downward, shit flows downhill. So this is that situation. The other thing is like you want to spend money efficiently. You know what's not efficient? Listening to the same 10 or 20 people and spending all of your time and all of your staff's time responding to these people. Like prioritization, if you broaden your communications, if you're talking to a lot more people on the different platforms, where, by the way, they're a lot more positive, it works better, right? So, tax and bond support, retention of staff, recruiting. Like you want young people, again, same thing with the young elected officials. A young firefighter who's looking at your agency, young police officer, they're considering joining your force. They're going to scan your Instagram, they're going to scan your TikTok. If you are not cool, they're going to go to a competing jurisdiction that is. So there's tons and tons of reasons why this really, really matters to local government. And that's why I do what I do, to give them that tool, and not to be like the long-term consultant that just sort of like stays with them. I've there are people that do this, we can get into that, but like I want to give a man a fish, they eat for a day, teach a man to fish, they eat for a lifetime. That is the purpose of what I do. And anyway, I get very excited. Sorry, Chris.
What? No, no, no. So Sam, it's great because I want. I guess we started the conversation talking about why are we in so what is social media? Why are we engaging in social media, right? And I think the big picture why we started with talking about the executive is, hey, you got to get you to buy in as a. Let me back up. I know there's a lot of city managers out there who don't give a damn about social media. They're like, that's just something that some other staff are taking care of. I'm focused on the big picture of X, Y, and Z. I could give zero F's about social media, right? And I get that. And
Yeah.
I totally understand where that mindset's coming from. The reason why Sam and I took this lengthy explanation to talk about why you as an executive should be engaged or thoughtful when it comes to social media, not that you necessarily have to be hands on yourself personally, right? Especially if you're in a larger organization, you have staff to do it. But why you should be invested as a leader is because you do have those personal, professional benefits that come from doing it correctly for you, not only for protecting your current job that you're in, but also for sharing that narrative and telling a story about what you're about as a city manager when you inevitably go on to the next chapter, the next organization. Okay. So the first and foremost is, you as a city manager need to buy into the whole concept of taking a proactive sort of engagement to the social media platform, because there's a whole host of benefits that come from that. And first and foremost is, hey, it's not it's not there's nothing unethical or immoral about thinking about how you benefit as the city manager from having a very robust and healthy, effective social media presence. It all trickles down from there. And I'm going to unpack that in a second, but I want to take a quick little sidebar, Sam, because you're talking about the changing media landscape going back from Walt Disney and radio and TV and now social media. Is the reality that exists today is that the overwhelming majority of human beings get their primary impression or information about what you're doing from social media, not from the local newspapers that might not even exist anymore, that might only be a weekly published publication, that might only be an online publication, which obviously if they're online, there's another social media connection there too, Sam. But the reality is that people get their information primarily from social media, for better or worse. And you and I are not changing that reality. So either you got to get in the sandbox and play the game better, or you're going to put your head in the sand and pretend that that's not the reality and you're going to suffer. Is that fair, Sam?
Yeah, no, I mean the data bears this out, right? Like it's social media has crossed and exceeded all other forms of media when it comes to where people get their news and information. That is just merely a fact. We know that they left television and radio and print. Like 6% of people get their information and news from print. And I know so many communities spend so much time worrying about that little rag that's going to have a little local story, and they spend countless hours worrying about what that goofy reporter is. It doesn't matter. No one's going to see it. Yes, the STPs will see it because they're the only people, that are there, and they're noisy and they're loud. But here's another thing that the data tells
But
us.
Sam, I want to step on you there because I think I think we've made this point, but I'm not sure if we fully crystallized it.
Yeah.
Because you talk about in your book the social media playbook for city and county managers, and you mentioned this term STPs, right? The same 10 people, the same 20 people. This idea that these small disgruntled minority of individuals in your community have this outsized influence, right? And In our first interview back on episode 67, when you talked about how everyone's, well, not everyone, but for the most part, nearly every city is doing social media wrong, you talked about the importance of creating these cheerleaders, right?
Mhm.
And getting people to basically sing your praises and tout what your organization is doing. Well, how do you do that if people aren't reading the newspaper and the number one way of getting information is through social media? You have to improve your social media presence in order to secure this contingent of cheerleaders who are going to go and be proselytizers on your behalf and the organization's behalf. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. And I'm going to talk a little bit about like why we know that's possible, because back when we had our first conversation in August, there was no Gallup poll that validated this, right? Gallup released a survey in September of last year, right in the heart of the election, and it measured trust. Who do you trust? Federal government, lowest ever recorded. The media, newspaper, radio, lowest ever recorded, 31%, right? The courts have lost trust over time. They used to be very trusted, not as much anymore. President, Congress, all in record low territories. Now, remember, when you're asking a survey, it's the same people. So those same people that said, we don't trust anybody, there was one exception: local government. 67% said they trusted. And I've validated this over the last 7 months since I've been off on the road with different. I will always ask, like, have you done a recent like sentiment survey, like trust survey? You got a bond measure, tax measure coming up that you've like done some testing for? Like, have you asked the question about? It's always the same. Oh yeah, 65, 70, 72, 68, right? What's the disconnect here? Well, the disconnect is that you're allowing this tiny fractional minority, because of poor social media strategy, to be the only ones that are in the face of the elected officials. And therefore, the elected officials are in your face and you're in staff's face, and it's costing your taxpayers a fortune. Meanwhile, most of your citizens like what you're doing, trust what you're going to tell them. You're just not talking to them. So, like we said in that episode, you're doing social media wrong, because there's a language of social media, and the core key to it, and this is a really important, this is just like, if you're taking notes on this episode, write this word down and circle it and underline it and go back to it. The difference between traditional media, and Joe, you use the word spin, it is the antithesis of, it's like you cannot, if you try to spin, you are not doing social media correctly.
Correct.
It is all about one word, and that word is authenticity. That means your videos don't have to be perfect. I see all these cities and they produce these lavish videos with these long introductions and all. Stop it. Grab your phone, show your public works worker digging, fixing a fire hydrant, talking about that. And maybe the phone's wobbly and maybe the audio's not perfect.
And maybe they're not the most articulate, right? Maybe they stutter a little bit of the words, or
But guess what? That
it's
is
real.
that's real, and it's the powerful, and it's scientifically backed. I saw a measurement. Somebody did a study, and they got people into like this chamber. I'm not a scientist, but it's super fascinating. And they measured emotional connectivity between human beings. Love is one of the most powerful emotions. That if two people feel love for one another, it's a very, very powerful emotion. Authenticity measured 4 times stronger than love.
Wow.
Right? It is, and social media, the trick's in the name. It's social. This is about having a conversation with your neighbor. If you went over to a dinner party to your neighbor's house, you wouldn't talk to them as if you were reading a press release. You'd ask them about their kids. You'd laugh. You'd be human. You'd be authentic. You got to be that way on social media, and that means video, right? That does not mean posting pretty flyers with little, pick up your recycling, or here's garbage day, or happy hot dog day. Everybody that does social media is trained by marketers, and marketing is the antithesis of actually being great at social media, unless you're a clever account like Duolingo or Nutter Butter, or sometimes Wendy's, though I think they troll a bit too much. But like, you're starting to see brands like Liquid Death, etc., understanding the power of social media and displacing their legacy counterparts, because they're like, oh yeah, social media is different. We talk differently, and we can be ourselves, and we can be a little bit more real. because that's what people are looking. We are at the dawn of AI. As the sun comes up on this next generation of technology advancement, the hunger and desperation for human authenticity will only accelerate more rapidly. So if you are not being authentic in the way that you communicate with people using the technology where they actually see your messaging, you're behind, and it's going to move faster and be more problematic.
Sam, I can see looking at the clock that we're gonna have to have a second episode for sure
We always
because
do this. We always do this.
yeah, because I wanna bring up a quick point, but I don't wanna get into this discussion right now. But you hit on something that I really want to unpack with you a little bit, and that is the conundrum of social media is the collision between authenticity and informality, which I think can be really difficult for local governments and executives to walk that path, right? Because you're trying to be authentic, you're trying to be social, you're trying to connect, but then there's also the need to be maintain some modicum of professionalism, right? You know what I mean?
Of
And I
course.
think that gets super tricky.
Of course. Look, those two things do not need to be mutually exclusive. I'll give you an example. I literally just did this in Lake Alfred, Florida, whose team, amazing. Their city manager was, for many, many years, had resisted, and he hired a young assistant who said, "You got to do this." And he changed his mind. And it's been, watching the smile on his face and seeing his staff come to light up, which happens every time I come to a city. He's like, "Oh my God, our staff feels engaged. I didn't think that they would do this." And so I use an example.
Engaged and empowered, right?
Empowered,
Because
yes.
tired of getting the shit kicked out of them by the haters on social media.
100%. But it's not just like we get to tell our story. It's like, oh my God, we do so much. It reminds them of why they do the work, because now they're thinking about, how do we show the work? How do we actually talk about the kinds of things that we're doing? And people who work in local government, genuinely, their heart is in the work that they do. And when they get to talk about it and think about it in story and how we bring that to life, they're like, oh my God, this is exactly the nourishment that we've been lacking for so long. So one of the issues that we sort of identified as a pain point, which is a pain point in a lot of cities, is potholes, right? Lake Alfred is growing extremely rapidly. What once used to be miles and miles of orange groves is now a lot of infrastructure, and it happened quickly. And potholes happen. In the state of Florida, the local jurisdiction has jurisdiction over certain roads. The county has county roads, and the state FDOT here in Florida has jurisdiction over that. Lake Alfred can't go onto a Florida road and fill a pothole. It's not their road. So they were expressing, like, we're out there and our roads are really good, but our citizens are constantly complaining because the county's a little slower, and of course the state is slower than the county, and it's in Lake Alfred, right? These potholes are here, so like we can't go, oh, it's the state's fault. And like I said, let's make a game show. Let's take this and make a game show. We'll call it "Whose Pothole Is It Anyway?" And we'll have three members of staff, and I'll give you each a sign. One will have the city's name and logo. The next will have FDOT. The next will have the county. I'll just ask you, like, whose potholes anyway? And we make it fun. And the whole idea of this is to humanize and bring attention to something. We're not saying like, oh, we're taking it as a game. It's
Not serious.
not serious, right? Because the beginning and the end of this is like, hey, if you see like a pothole in Lake Alfred, let us know using the app. And we're going to make sure, if it's not ours, we're going to fill the ones that are ours. If it's not ours, we'll make sure that the agency knows. But what you're doing is you're educating people through story on something that I think faces a lot of cities. How I know my friend, Will over in Calamasa struggles with, Caltrans is notoriously slow at doing certain things, and he's like, this is a Caltrans problem. How do I? But it's in our city. How do I articulate that? How do we tell that story? And we release this content, and people light up. They light up. They're like, I love this staff. I love what they're doing. This is so much fun. I had no idea. Right? I had no idea. You're going to post a Canva post that says Florida Department of Transportation is responsible for these 50 roads, right? No one's going to read it.
That's
It's
right.
literally, there's 5 billion posts made on social media every single day, right? If you're not using clever, entertaining, engaging content that people want to share with their neighbors, it's just going to miss them. And so people are like, why don't they know? because you're not speaking to them in a way that makes it engaging, entertaining, and shareable. And that is sort of just an example of one of the things that we teach, which is like, how do you make these videos? How do you come up with these ideas? How do we as staff be empowered to make content? And then who's going to sort of be the gatekeeper? And I always say, like, there's got to be someone, whether it's the PIO or someone who you're giving the responsibility for communications, you have a gatekeeper. Allow staff to make as much content as they want within the parameters of them still being able to do their full-time job well, right? If they want to pick up the phone and do content, you're not giving them the keys to the platform. You're giving them the keys to their camera phone, and you have a person who we train to be a strategist to say it's these pieces of content for this platform, because what works on TikTok is different than what works on Instagram, which is different than what works on Facebook, and sometimes it works on all of them. Knowing where to put it, when, and how, and getting that engagement from different segments of your audience is strategic. But once you know it, you got every one of these cities that I work with can do it and can do it well. It's not like, an ongoing endless expense of like, I got to hire a marketing firm or I got to have like a whole team of people. Like, it's, you have everything you need within the walls of City Hall. You just need to activate them. And through that activation, their enjoyment of what they do explodes. They're excited.
You talked about giving the keys or unlocking and activation. It's what's great about what you're talking about, Sam, is giving staff the freedom, the autonomy, the empowerment, right, to unlock the creative aspects of social media, which is where you really thrive. The creativity is so important, and I think in government we're so used to being risk averse within these rigid confines or guardrails of rules, and we got to, we can't offend this person or this group, and so forth and so on. What I find fascinating about social media and what you're talking about here is, I think that, yeah, you can be creative, and you mentioned Wendy's a little earlier. They can get a little on the edge as far as trolling, right? And it can cause some backlash, right? But also, most everybody knows about the Wendy's Twitter account or X account because they are kind of creative and they are kind of pushing the envelope, right? But I think what happens is a lot of communities, they play this passive sort of like, we have to be on social media, so we do just a bare minimum. We put the information out there. We don't tell our story, and therefore all you are is opening up the floodgates for people to drop their hate and their bombs and their criticism. It's like, how many times have you been on a city's social media page, right, and you see a link to some random event that's coming up, and then you'll have some snide remark underneath it because they have no other avenue to really kind of complain, right, or whatever.
Yeah,
But
it's
what
yeah.
but real quick, Sam, you touched on something I really want to hit on here, because we're going back to why you should be on social media, or what's the social media for from your organization's perspective, and you mentioned it. When you humanize your employees and you start telling those stories, it's so much more difficult for the haters to go and throw those bombs because they look really mean and nasty, right? It's
Mhm.
one thing to basically drop a bomb about, hey, how about these unfilled potholes, or why is the city screwing up over here, yada yada yada, when you have just some Canva type post talking about how trash service is being skipped this week for a holiday or something. You know what I mean? It's like, but when you throw the actual waste collector up there who's telling a story about the waste hauling, you're not going to get the same sort of response usually. I forget what the study is or where I heard this, Sam, but it talked about in hostage negotiations, something like, if you could get the hostage taker to basically name a hostage or communicate the name of the hostage, something like the odds of saving those lives rise exponentially because you've humanized those hostages that the hostage takers taken. And so that was what's so important about social media, is humanizing your government, humanizing your employees to minimize some of that toxicity that we see.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And I had an example. I might have shared it in an earlier episode, but it's worth retouching on for people who didn't hear that episode, which is, when we did one of our first cities, I got a call from the city manager, and he's like, you wouldn't believe what happened. Somebody stood up and they were critiquing our trails, because trails are super important, and keeping those trails clean for hikers and the people who enjoy them is a big value that the city provides. Somebody's like, oh, the city's not doing its job on the trails. They're a mess. And four people stood up and said, you're not paying attention on social media. You don't know Mary. It wasn't like, you don't know this city. They're like, no, you don't know Mary. And she's a wizard with a chainsaw. And she talked about the trail you mentioned, and she's on that. And if you were paying attention, but how dare you attack Mary's work? Once you've taken the idea of trail maintenance and you've humanized it in the form of
Of someone
Mary.
when you get somebody in the public to go and communicate a staff by name, you know you've done a hell of a job with your social media, right?
That's exactly right. And you know, we I tested a video with Lake Alfred before we did the pothole with Margarita, who's their amazing HR lead, the department head of HR, and she's done a lot of work in the community. She meets people. She's clearly somebody that there's affection for. But I think this is one of the first pieces of video content that we showed. It was a very simple video. It was they've switched to a different app to report your potholes and things, and so we had to sort of like announce the app. And so I did a little video with her. I pretended I was the new guy in town, and I wanted to know where to get my utility turned on, and she's like, and she just was so natural. But I looked at the comments, and they're only on Facebook, which is typically a very negative platform, but at least a half a dozen comments. Oh, we love Margarita. Oh, way to go, Margarita. You're so good, right? Like they know her by name. They know her by name probably because she's engaging, face to face with a lot of the folks on Facebook. But now you can amplify that human touch, that connection that you have to those members of staff that have that warm and wonderful personality where the work that they do and the passion for that work is just so obvious. Putting them into video and bringing them to life just creates a shield around your ship that is, City Hall. And you can truly, truly take back control, which I think is the reason that city management has been so reluctant, right? Like they're like, we have to be here because someone somewhere told us, maybe it was one of the professional organizations like social media is important, and so they're like they performative, right? They're like, we have a
Yes.
Facebook account, we have an Instagram, and they open their Instagram account, and then they're just cross posting from Facebook that same recycling is going to be late today. Well, that's not good, right? Because the Instagram audience, that's not what they're looking for. They're
It's
looking
not
for,
building a connection, right?
yeah, my government's clueless. Like this is what I pay taxes for them to put up these meaningless posts about service days being missed and what, like, you're asking for. You're just like you said it perfectly. You're inviting the STPs to fill the void that you are not engaged in. And I hear a lot like our staff is maxed out. We don't have time. And I think this will be a good capper on this conversation. The amount of time you spend talking to and dealing with the STP. I know every city manager, if somebody speaks,
Draining. It's
right,
draining.
right, like I can guarantee you, I haven't met a city manager who, when somebody goes to a council meeting and stands up and has a complaint, that city manager is not after that meeting walking off the dais, coming up to that person saying, can I have your phone number? Can we talk about this? Getting a staff member to call them back, having follow-up meetings. There is You're already doing this. You're just not doing it efficiently, and you're not using technology that was built to have this happen, in a way that's more positive, more proactive. And it's just, there's so much good in social media. And I know we've all seen the bad, but I promise you, there is a better way.
Yeah, yeah. It's soul crushing, it's draining, and you got to take the oxygen for all the hatred and the nastiness in social media away by not just being performative when it comes to social media, right? By actually having a strategic plan, being proactive, being mindful, being truly engaged, and utilizing the platform for good. And so I guess this is a good place to kind of wrap up and summarize what we've talked about here, Sam. And that is, one, why do you want to be on social media if you're a local government from a city manager perspective? Is one, you're going to basically produce positive benefits for you as the leader, connectivity as far as creating that connection between you and your governing body, connect that connection between you and your residents, as far as, hey, there's a real human being here leading this community, right? And we're doing good things, right? So you're telling that story. So there's a benefit from you on a personal level. Second, you want to humanize the employees, right? Because you humanize the employees, that again takes some of the hatred, the volatility, the nastiness out of the social media sphere, because you're putting real faces, real names to what's going on with your government. You used a great word a moment ago. You talked about the shield, right? Going around the employees. Many, if not every city manager listening to this podcast, Sam, will say, hey, I care about my employees, my staff. I want to protect my staff. I know a lot of city managers who make it a very much a personal mission to try to inoculate their staff from being abused by either the elected officials on the dais or from the public at public comments, right? So think about this one. If you truly want to protect your staff, what better way can you do that than by humanizing your employees and putting them out there in the social media, spotlighting what they're doing, right? And these very personal, touching stories, and you're going to protect them. Okay. Third, we talked about recruitment and other sort of benefits that come with having a positive, robust social media presence. We all know staffing can be difficult as far as getting people recruited in these positions. Well, if you have a reputation for being a well-run community that you're putting out there through your social media, if you have a reputation for having happy staff that are being praised by their city manager, being praised by their electeds, being praised by the public on these social media comments, it's going to make you more likely to attract the staff. And then the fourth component is your elected officials. Your elected officials are political animals. They need to get reelected, right? So if they see the city is being run really well and it's being communicated and the story is being told on social media and they see happy staff and they see retention and they see all the stuff that's going on there, right, Sam? Don't you make your elected officials happy, right? I mean, so
It,
it's a
yes.
necessity. I mean, why are
Yes.
you on social media? Is because you don't have to, you want to be because you have to, if that makes sense. Right? I mean,
I
I
think it's a
mean,
perfect way to end it, right? That's
I,
exactly right.
I mean, yeah. I mean, you can choose to bury your head in the sand and live in the dark and pretend it's not something for you. But the world's moving on; it's trudging on, and those who truly implement an effective social media strategy that you, Sam Toles and Savvy Social, can help them create, help them develop and strategize through your services, it's going to pay huge dividends down the line.
Yeah, I just say that the most common refrain I get from those I work with is this is the best investment I've made in our city, period. A, because it's a inexpensive program, and B, because it's one time, and benefits like we just talked about are ongoing. The work is so rewarding for me because I get to see people go, oh, why do you do this? Like my friends in media are like, really? This is a strange choice that you made. But they don't know the joy I get in watching my Instagram, my TikTok, my YouTube feeds, and seeing those amazing people that I've gotten to know in the short time that I'm in any given client city bring their personalities to life and see those smiles. It's like it's just so fulfilling. And I know for the city managers, like that's the reason. Seeing their staff smile, like very infrequently are they the ones that want to be on camera, but when they see their staff empowered and smiling and taking the reins and creating something special that helps the organization, that helps connect it with the people they serve, there's nothing more powerful and there's nothing more rewarding to me personally.
Awesome, awesome. Sam, I should have known this was going to happen. We're an hour in, and we have a lot more to cover from the book and just in social media in general. We did not really get a chance to unpack this project that you and I are going to be working on through the American Association of Municipal Executives, a joint venture between AAME and Civi Social. So I think we'll unpack that in part two. So I apologize to the audience. I wasn't trying to do a bait and switch. I wasn't trying to do a clickbait style podcast to get you to the next episode. But I am excited about some of the things that Sam and I have been working on because they really dovetail nicely with what we've just been talking about, right? As far as STPs and elected officials and why you want to have a robust social media presence. So stay tuned for the next episode. I'm Joe Turner, and Sam Toles with Civic Social has been my guest today. We are going to unpack more of this in part two, the next episode. If you've enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed the show, please hit that follow, subscribe button. If you like the content, please leave a rating and review on your platform of choice. I would greatly appreciate it. Stay tuned. Next week, we're going to have a great episode once again with Sam Toles.